World of Warcraft, Classic Mode, Timewalker Mode. Let's talk. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Monday, September 2nd, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay Radio Style.
So I want to get away from some of this podcasting and get back to some actual gaming videos with stuff actually going on the screen. But before I do that, I just wanted to record a quick discussion about the two ideas that I have for fixing modern WoW in light of what's happened with WoW Classic, Classic Mode, and Timewalker Mode. I mentioned this earlier, but these ideas have enough oomph to them that I figured they probably deserved their own podcast. So I just wanted to get into a discussion on what these two features would be if Blizzard, in light of what's happened with the Classic WoW launch, wants to modify modern WoW to be more like its ancestor and therefore be more successful. So first, let's talk about Classic Mode. To understand Classic Mode, you have to understand what WoW Classic specifically is. And it's probably a good idea if you watch the video on the making of. And if you watch that video, that's where you'll see that WoW Classic isn't exactly a straight port of patch 112 Vanilla World of Warcraft. It's actually a mix of the data from back in the day with a modern WoW client. Basically, what they did was they took modern WoW and removed all the modern stuff, and then tried to make it play nice with the data from patch 112. And that is why we have a combination of everything from the old game with some more modern stuff, like better graphics options, things in the, better sliders and stuff like that. The ability to play either with classic-looking graphics or with HD remake-looking graphics, should you choose, as well as some more modern amenities like getting multiple pieces of mail at once with the mailbox button. But considering what it took to get Classic WoW working, the elements are already there to add a classic mode to the modern game to bring back the pre-Cataclysm experience, but with modern amenities like looking for dungeon and transmog. Also things like hunters having focus and things like that. Here's how this would work. This whole idea is inspired by War Mode in Battle for Azeroth. The way War Mode works, War Mode replaced the whole PvE server, PvP server thing. And what you do is you go to your faction capital to toggle on War Mode. Your character will then celebrate and go, "For the Alliance," or "For the Horde," depending on what you're playing, of course. And then you'll be flagged for PvP, and you will be phased into a version of the world that contains other people flagged for PvP that have War Mode going. And that's when you basically go from PvE realm to PvP realm. And there's some bonuses attached to playing in PvP mode as well, to go along with the additional danger of getting ganked and camped and all that fun PvP stuff out in the world. The key thing, though, is that the technology that makes War Mode possible also makes Classic Mode possible. So here's what I'm thinking. You can toggle on Classic Mode in your capital city, just like War Mode, and it will change Azeroth back to the pre-Cataclysm Azeroth. And when you create a character, you get to select as part of your origin story, what modes you want turned on to start the game. I'd even go so far as to say, if you want to be level 1 in War Mode, and hopefully there aren't people ganking you in the starting areas, that should be an option for you. And when we add in Classic Mode and Timewalker Mode and being able to have all of those start either on or off in any combination you choose, it really plays well into player freedom. If you pick Classic Mode and say, my character, my hero is from before the Cataclysm, then you will go through that experience first. For everyone else, much like if you go to a zone that goes through significant changes and want to change back to a previous version of the zone, like the Blasted Lands, for those of you that switch between the Cataclysm version and the Warlords of Draenor version, as well as, of course, Silithus nowadays, with sword, big giant demon sword, no big giant demon sword. In your capital city, there will be a bronze dragonflight representative who can change the entire world back to pre-Cataclysm Azeroth. Now, what about flying mounts? Because that, of course, is the question here. If you go into classic mode, what about flying? Because the original world did not support flying, because there were things like incomplete structures and stuff that was only just made enough, so to speak, to be viewed from looking on the ground. If you go up in the air, you'll see how incomplete everything is. Well, Blizzard has already had a no-flying mount debuff before in the Timeless Isle back in Mists of Pandaria. When you went to the Timeless Isle, you were thrown off your flying mounts after X amount of seconds, and then there was this debuff that said, the time currents are all messed up here, or something to that effect, so your flying mounts aren't going to work. Blizzard could change that tooltip to say, because of the massive amount of time manipulation going on by the Bronze Dragonflight, you can no longer fly in your flying mounts. Similar debuff, but the same effect. So as we can see, all of the components are in place for classic mode to get added to the modern game, for people that want a classic light experience, so to speak. So maybe they want the pre-Cataclysm Azeroth, but they want things like looking for dungeon and stuff like that. There's probably people out there who want that. They like some of the newer features of the game and they just want to play in the old world. This would make that possible, and it would provide something for them to go to instead of trying to get Blizzard to change the classic client. So that way, classic as it is remains basically a timepiece or a period piece, as it were. So it stays the way it was back in the day. But people that only want to see the old world can use the modern game and get all the modern amenities that come with it, and they don't have to worry about classic ever being changed or Blizzard caving or anything of that sort. Considering the arguments that have already taken place about how classic should always be classic, and how classic should classic be, or can someone please just squeak in this one modern feature, and then there's the big argument afterwards about hashtag no changes and stuff like that. Plus, when you consider what it took to get classic working in the first place, Blizzard already has all the components they need to add classic mode. They just have to put everything together and release it. This would add, of course, the pre-Cataclysm experience back to the game, which people could play perhaps on characters that already played this content many years ago. And the question now is, what value would it be to put all this low-level stuff back in the game if you're already past it, or something like that? Unless you want to roll lots of alts or something. Well, that's where Timewalker Mode comes in, and this would be something else that you switch on and off in your capital city. So one of the big issues with World of Warcraft throughout the years is that the expansion packs don't really expand anything, they just replace old content. And this adds a sense of progression, but at the expense of the world doesn't really get bigger as you progress, it actually gets smaller. And nowadays there are competing games that don't do this. They make it so that as you progress through the game, you unlock more content, you have more things to do, and eventually you can 100% complete everything, and it's not going to be a face roll if you don't get to it in a timely fashion. World of Warcraft does not have that, and has been operating this way long enough that there might be some people that actually don't want it to ever be part of the game. The way to make this work is to take the existing feature used for time-walking dungeons and have something that toggles on and off in the capital cities with this Bronze Dragonflight representative that also can toggle on classic mode for you. When time-walking mode is activated, when you go to a zone that's lower level or that you are outside the level bracket for because you've leveled past it, you will be set back to the maximum level for the zone, and your skills and abilities will be scaled down. Not necessarily like what's been experimented with in party sync mode on the PTRs, where you might actually lose old skills, or like if you hit the sync button in Final Fantasy XIV, but more in line with the existing time walking that already exists in the dungeons, where you keep your skills and abilities, but your power gets scaled down to the maximum level for the zone. So that way, you can go back to old zones and maybe do some quests you didn't do or forgot about or never got around to, and they'll still be somewhat of a challenge as opposed to a complete and total face roll. Speaking of which, much like War Mode, when you turn on Timewalker Mode, all you will see is people that have it switched on, so there won't be somebody at max level nuking all of your quest mobs because you will be in a different phase when you switch on Timewalker Mode. This would bring World of Warcraft more in line with some of its competitors these days, where the world does get bigger and the content gets broader, so to speak, as you progress, instead of stuff getting replaced and the world actually getting smaller. It also offers an incentive for Blizzard to create things like world quests for some of the zones that might be considered obsolete in the current setup. So that way, there could be a world quest out somewhere, you turn on Timewalker mode and you just head out to that area or something like that, and you stay at the appropriate level for the zone, and things along those lines. Now, it won't make any sense in the terms of the way things are today, but we're talking time walking here. So it runs off of the same principle as time walking events. Plus, if you are building a reputation or something that you didn't get around to when you were in the level range for it in some other part of the world that you are now past in terms of progression, this will make it not so boring when you actually have a little bit of challenge left there because you get set back to the maximum level for the area. And that is time walking mode. You turn it on and off in your capital cities and you decide how do you want your experience to be out in the world. If you want to do, for example, soloing an old raid or something, you would turn off time walking mode, and that way you could go in and you could have the damage boosts and stuff along those lines. But if you want a larger world where more of it is challenging to you and more of the world matters, or if you want to, say, do some daily quests for a faction you're trying to get up to Exalted with that you didn't get around to when you were in the level range, Time Walker mode would be the way to go. Now, as you can guess, perhaps Time Walker mode would be interesting on its own, but Classic mode would not be interesting without Time Walker mode, because if your characters are, of course, past the old world, it's not going to matter if you can switch back to it and go back and face roll everything. What makes it interesting in terms of a little bit of nostalgia, without actually going back and starting a new character in WoW Classic, the client, is the option of turning on Time Walker mode, going back, and being at a reasonable level for what is in that zone. I don't think any of these ideas are far-fetched at all. They would be good if they all released together, even if it's when the next expansion comes out. And I hardly believe that this is anything original on my part. There has to be somebody at Blizzard who has seen the technical feats that they've accomplished by getting Classic up and running and thought, what if we did these sorts of things to give players more choice and more freedom to experience World of Warcraft the way they'd like to experience it, instead of being shoehorned into a design that, quite frankly, has gotten quite dated in the last couple of years, as viable competition has popped up in the MMO world. These features, if they were released, would improve the sense of player freedom in World of Warcraft, give players more options, and also help with subscriber retention when it was harder to get bored with the game, and it would give Blizzard reasons to spread more content out around the world if you turned on Time Walker mode, because they could also have things like world quests and stuff with Time Walker mode turned on, and stuff along those lines. I think Blizzard could probably take both of these ideas further than I've described them here, but at least in terms of the fundamentals of how they would both work, I think they would both be good for this game, revitalizing the now ailing modern WoW game versus its ancestor Classic, as well as reviving and revitalizing World of Warcraft's position on the competitive stage versus other MMOs and other video games these days. Here's to hoping that Blizzard rolls out something like this, even if they call it something else. Because I know they like to look clever when they roll out new ideas. For other comparisons about Classic versus modern WoW, be sure to stay tuned to Play Some Stuff, as that is precisely the sort of stuff I want to highlight in the coming days with the next round of gaming videos. Thanks for listening, everybody. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.